Hi there, Vibe Gardeners. In this edition of Vibe Gardening Informed Edition, we're going to talk about what is hydroponics, what types there are, and some of the basics of how I'm going to kick off this Hydroponics 101 series. With that said, let's go. All right, so before we go and get started on any of the types of hydroponic, let's break down what is hydroponic. So hydroponics is come from the two Greek-based word of hydro, which means water, and the panos, where as English translated to ponics, is works. So basically, it's working with water is what hydroponic means. And the reason behind why we're talking about this way is that the idea of hydroponics, you're trying to basically remove soil from the equation and basically use water as the main medium of which you're going to basically keep a plant alive and going to basically essentially become your own God in a sense that you're completely controlling every element of what normally is nature but now is in your hands to make the plant grow. So it's one of those things that like it's very scientific in how it is, but as you get into it, like I've experienced in the past year of just continually experimenting on different crops or the same crop on different batches, that there is definitely a science aspect of it, but when it comes to practice, it's more art than a science. And that's when the vibe comes in. Because if you follow the chart exactly for science, you will get yourself a dead plant, which I've had happen to me multiple times. And I've learned quite a bit from it, from my journey. And essentially, you need to see, like humans, what each plant desires and wants at whatever state, because each plant, even if the same species, they might end up needing and wanting different things as you go along. So that is basically what hydroponics is. So talking about the different types of hydroponics, there are as many types of hydroponics as there are types of animals on this earth. It feels like, at least. There's endless possibilities of the ways we can do it, and then there's also like hybrid and everything. But to make things simple, I'm going to be focusing on these five type of hydroponic that the University of Florida Extension has mentioned in this article that I'm going to link below. And if you want to get more into how commercial growing style goes, I also will link the part two of this article that kind of goes into more of the commercial stuff that frankly I don't have the skills, equipment, time, or energy to go into. So, with that said, let's go into the five styles of hydroponic that you might see out there. But eventually, I would narrow it down to only just one that I'm really going to focus on for my style growing hydroponically, and I recommend all beginners to start with. So, with that said, let's go. So the first two type of hydroponic I'm going to go into a little bit that they have mentioned are the more advanced types of hydroponic. So the first one is essentially ebb and flow style. That one, as the diagram I have showed here, is kind of essentially mimicking the tide of Earth as the moon cycle goes through, and there's this constant flooding and drying period of getting the nutrition to the plant. And the second type that is more advanced is going to be nutrition film technique, or NFT. And so this is more kind of like basically you got constant moving water, and there's going to be pipe and pumps and all that stuff. And these two I would call more advanced type of hydroponic because there's going to be a lot more advanced in almost industrial level equipment that you will be needing that a normal grower like you and I at home in a basement, we will not have access to this level of advanced growing. Now, there are more scaled down version of it that I have seen on YouTube of people doing, but in reality, these things are not as fault tolerant as the type that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. Because if you have one failure in your system of like a pump or anything like that, essentially it would lead to a catastrophic chain of events that will basically doom your whole entire crop. And that's why these are the types that I don't generally go for, but they're very effective and they can be something you want to get into as you get more advanced in your hydroponic skills. Now, the next two, I know a lot of people do at least one of them, but I think these two are very sketchy. I'm very skeptical, and I'll be upfront with it. I'm not going to go into it because I'm not bought in on how these things are actually hydroponic. So the first one I want to talk about is what I call blasphemy. It's going to be aeroponic, and the aeroponic is really it's basically almost like a lack of water. As the name suggests, aeroponic is essentially the Greek word air and working with combined. So it's really working with air instead of water, which is what hydroponic is. And the reason why I think I mean, this is the main reason why I feel it's almost blasphemous to call it hydroponic, because it's really not. I mean, yes, there is definitely water for sure. You're definitely delivering nutrition in the form of water. As I'll go into later on, you'll see the importance here is that you always will need water. And that's what technically makes it hydroponic. You still need the water to deliver the nutrition. But the main thing here is that you will see a lot of different variants of it on Amazon. If you look into it, there could be products that basically helps you suspend root in air, and you have to use a spray bottle and spray on it. It's very tedious. You have to spray it all the time, and it really is not what I recommend, because unless you have a continuous spraying system that is regulated on timer, it really is not built to be sustainable in a residential home like you and I here. That I'm sure when you watch me, you're coming from a residential home. So this is why I don't think aeroponic is a good idea, even though it technically is hydroponic. And even if I don't have skepticism that it is actually hydroponic, I still wouldn't go this route because of that very high maintenance style of growth. And obviously, it will not work for everything because you have to depend on plants that are capable of being able to sustain long periods of dryness on the root. And so finally, with the very sketchy stuff, I'm going to go into something I feel like at least what I saw on Amazon, majority of them are more on the scam level, which is aquaponic. Aquaponic is really kind of basically building a hydroponic system on top of your aquarium. This is where you're essentially using a biological ecosystem to sustain your hydroponic system, where you're essentially letting the roots clean the aquarium while the fish and the wildlife that's living in your aquarium is producing basically bio waste that will basically turn into fertilizer for your plants. In theory, it sounds great, but in reality, what ends up happening is that it is the scale of which most of us can do this is not going to be big enough. You need something like 20 to 40 gallon aquarium to be able to even pull this off. And on top of that, you have to basically be able to maintain this thing like a pro aquarium caretaker. And on top of that, you have all that science involved. I mean, it's technically possible, but it is very tedious and very well, space consuming, time consuming, and it's just a lot of skills that a lot of people who are doing this at home just does not have. And that's why, like, when you see these things set up that you see on Temu or Amazon, you will see people set this thing up kind of like, oh yeah, I can just put it on top of whatever aquarium you have, and you can have strawberry grow on it. But in reality, what really ends up happening is you will end up with a system that cannot sustain the kind of nutrition your plant needs. That's why I'm basically putting a lot of this thing on the scam level because of the marketing that goes behind it with Amazon products. So the final type of hydroponic that this article goes into that I feel like is definitely worth mentioning, because it's a type that I'm doing and I recommend all beginners to using, is deep water culture, or DWC. DWC you'll find is also the most common system and the products you can find on Amazon and other e-commerce websites, and also in your local shops. The reason for that is most forgiving in that you constantly have this reservoir of water, and the roots are basically suspended through a growing medium over this water. And essentially what you're doing is you're consistently trying to keep the water with a certain chemistry, the nutrition, pH, and all that stuff. And it's basically trying to mimic a stable system for your plants to grow. And with the right lighting, and essentially also adding aeration, this system is essentially extremely stable and fault tolerant. So if you have one part of this system fail, you're not having anything catastrophic if you don't address it right away. You have definitely you have to address it eventually, but the thing is, you have a much longer period of which a grace period that you have before you have to address it. And that's why it's the most fault tolerant and forgiving for beginners. And that's what I've gone into. And I really enjoy growing DWC type um, hydroponic system. Another advantage of DWC style hydroponic system is also the least costly of them all, in that you can essentially use a lot of very much consumer level products. And a lot of them are going to be aquarium equipment. They're going to be simple air or water pumps. These are simple stuff that you can buy from either your local big box store or you can buy from online retailers like Amazon and be able to just put together your own kit. They also have assembled kits that they can give you that does everything you need in a hydroponic system. So it's extremely easy to do. And another thing is that with a DWC is that it comes down to also two types. You have your passive and active. So the passive style is actually essentially what people call the Kratky technique, which is developed by Dr. Kratky from University of Hawaii, where you can essentially maintain this deep water culture without use of essentially anything electrified. So you don't need anything that's powered by electricity. And that is extremely popular in certain areas where you want to have a simple system. And you're basically using the change in the water to become this introduction of air into your system. This is essentially a lot of for the underdeveloped, economically underdeveloped nations. This is what they're trying to really kind of come up with as a way of becoming more economically vibrant. And but that's not the type I'm going to, because with that you are limited still with the type of plants you can grow in them. So I'm using the more traditional style, which is what they call active style, which will require electric powered pumps to be able to maintain the system. And so yeah, that's the type that you will see me talk about the most. And there's a lot of other things that goes into it, like differentiating between growing mediums, lighting, the type of containers you have. And there's going to be whole other episodes coming where I'm going to describe these type of differences in DWC, which is, again, the focus of my channel. The final segment I have talked about to make this truly a hydroponics 101 first episode is about what I call the 4 pillars of what makes hydroponic work. A lot of people have a lot more other things that goes into it, like 6, 8, or whatever. But I feel like a majority of them really distills down to these 4 key components of a hydroponic system that makes it work. And that is essentially what the nature provides that you're simulating. First, obviously, it's going to be light. Without light, there's no photosynthesis, and the plant will essentially die from not having the energy it needs to make food. And then the other one is going to be water. Water is going to be essentially your medium of which to transport the nutrition to the roots. Also, obviously, most plants cannot go without having a moist root system. And then the next thing is going to be air. Obviously, we talk a lot about having perlite in your soil, having a structure to not drown your plant or your roots in the soil that it's in. And that's going to be provided by introducing air into the water, which is going to be through, for the DWC active form I'm talking about, will be through an electrified pump, either a water pump through the actual current flowing of the water, introduce air, or actual air pump, like with aquarium, actually pumping the air into the water to add oxygenation and air to the water so the roots can breathe. And finally, obviously, we're going to talk about nutrition, our friend NPK, and the other micronutrients that are going to go into the whole entire growing process of a plant. As we mentioned with the law of minimum, there is going to be still the same thing applies. You need nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. These things don't change when it comes to hydroponic. As a matter of fact, it becomes less forgiving because you don't have soil to buffer that nutrition intake, and it's going to be up to you to make sure that the amount of nutrition coming in is the right kind, not too fast to burn it, not too low so that the plants starve. And the whole pH thing comes into play to make that nutrition work. So like I said, there's a lot of other elements that goes into hydroponics, but these four are the main ones that essentially makes it work, and everything else comes in a supporting cast for these four characteristics of hydroponic. So I hope that little introduction gave you with the different types of hydroponic that is most common for you to see on the internet, as well as the four pillars of hydroponic, give you a good foundation of understanding what is hydroponic gardening and how you can potentially get going on that. But coming up in this winter, I'm going to do a whole series on hydroponic one-on-one. I'm going to show you some of the more fundamentals of how the four pillars of hydroponics work, some of the other pillars that people talk about, how lighting works, and then obviously I'm going to show you guys how to build your own hydroponic system using everyday products you can buy at the store, as well as the different types that I've tried, and give you a lot of my experience on how I grew some of the leafy greens at home that you can also grow in your own house, probably in a basement like me. And with that said, keep gardening, keep vibing. Let's go.